Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the IoT For All Podcast. I'm Ryan Chacon, and on today's episode, we are going to talk about industrial metaverse trends, as well as why 70% of edge initiatives fail and what can be done to increase the likelihood of success on that front. With me today is Ganesh Sivaraman, the Director of Products and Omniverse Digital Twins at NVIDIA, a pioneer in accelerated computing, and now are a full-stack computing company with data center scale offerings that are really focused on reshaping the industry. Prior to jumping into this conversation, please subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. Hit that bell icon to get the latest episodes as soon as they are out, and give this video a thumbs up, and we'd truly appreciate it. But other than that, on to the episode. Welcome, Ganesh, to the IoT For All Podcast. Thanks for being here this week.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Excited about this conversation. And I wanted to kick this off by having you give a quick introduction about yourself and the company to our audience.
That's great. So thank you for having me, Ryan. So my name is Ganesh Sivaraman. I've been in the tech industry for 20 plus years, from ranging from like mobile telecom background all the way to doing my own startup, and then most recently, before joining NVIDIA, was focused on building IoT infrastructures into the lighting LED lighting market and rolling that out as like indoor location services and asset tracking
Right.
services to some of the big box retailers. I recently joined NVIDIA just a little under a year. And my role here is primarily to be part of the Omniverse platform, which we'll go into a little bit more. And NVIDIA, as people know, has been around for since the 90s, and they've been very well known for everything that they do with gaming and GPUs in
Right.
general. And over the
Right.
years, NVIDIA has transformed itself to becoming, of course, a very AI centric company. It has a lot of different products and tools that powers modern AI today. And most recently, they have essentially kind of expanded that AI and GPU capability to start building virtual worlds and industrial metaverses and etc. So that's what Omniverse is all about. And I'm part of the Omniverse product team focused on the digital twin side and the IoT side.
Fantastic. Talk us through, just to give a little bit more context to our audience, more of kind of the use case and applications as it relates to the IoT space that you all kind of play in, or how it kind of connects to the IoT space, the things you're doing directly in that realm, just so our audience has some context. Because as you mentioned, NVIDIA is very well known for a lot of things, but I'm not sure our audience is as familiar with what you're doing as it relates to the IoT space. So maybe talking a little bit more in around deployments or applications or kind of the things you're bringing kind of to that industry.
So I think we need to kind of break that into two parts as
Sure.
NVIDIA, and then also from an Omniverse lens perspective. So let me kind of take the NVIDIA perspective of things and how that relates to IoT, and then I'll touch upon that how Omniverse and IoT kind of fit together as well. So if you look at NVIDIA in general, because of all the compute capabilities that it has been bringing to the table for the last several years, one of the key areas that NVIDIA has been actively playing and continues to play is in the whole edge device side of things when it comes to IoT. And as we all know from the IoT landscape, edge gateways and edge devices play a very important role in bridging the OT/IT gap, the operational technologies and the information technologies. And with great advancements that's happening on the AI side, a lot of these inferences and models that are required to make certain decisions are now happening more and more at the edge. So NVIDIA has been actually been very active in the IoT space through the tools and the chipsets that they've been providing to make that edge compute possible for several different use cases. And if you look at it from an Omniverse perspective, which is the other side of things that NVIDIA is involved in, is that Omniverse is a platform primarily, and it is mainly used for building large scale virtual worlds. And
Okay.
when we're talking about virtual worlds, it's basically nothing but metaverse, an industrial metaverse, or whatever different applications of virtual worlds that the customers want to build. They come to Omniverse to build that virtual world.
Hmm.
One of the things that Omniverse has started to resonate well with a lot of customers is how do I create these digital twin, which is an exact identical replica of my physical world. And the
Right.
physical world could be anything you can imagine as a factory, as a warehouse, as a data center that is either yet to be designed and deployed, or that
Mhm.
is already deployed. So you can think
Okay.
about it in two different ways. So Omniverse actually allows for customers to create those virtual worlds. Now, when you're creating a virtual world, the other side of the virtual world is the physical world, which means that there are equipments, machines, systems, whatever that is operating, has to essentially be plugged into the virtual world. That's where
Okay.
IoT comes in.
Right.
So, how do you bring in those physical, continuous real world data streams, IoT data streams from the physical world and connect that to the virtual world? So, both of them, the virtual and the physical, are living in perfect harmony. That's
And
how the IoT plays from an NVIDIA
yeah.
perspective on both sides of things.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I was actually I had somebody on recently who was talking a lot more about obviously digital twins tied into this, but we were talking about kind of simulation and being able to run simulations early on, in kind of setting up kind of that digital world presence prior to
Correct.
any type of physical elements coming into it. But it sounds like this is actually bringing in physical elements as well on top of it from a data stream standpoint. Is that kind of accurate?
That's correct, but
Okay.
you can. So that actually is a good way to break down the reasons why we need IoT data streams
Mm,
into any applications that is related to a metaverse or creating this industrial metaverse. So you
okay.
could think about it in one or two different ways. One is I'm actually interested in simulating the world exactly as you said. So I have
Hmm.
not necessarily built anything yet, or I've already built something, but I want to actually run scenarios, different scenarios, or simulate them before I make any changes or optimizations to my processes or to my factory or to my warehouse. So things are already running and producing whatever it's producing, but we want to simulate and see what more further efficiencies or gain we can get
Mm,
without actually making any changes to the physical factory or a physical warehouse because you have to stop it. There's a lot of stoppage loss, and so you
okay.
cannot really make those decisions that easily when you're dealing with the physical world. So that's where the simulation comes in. So when you're doing simulations, one of the things that you want to know the baseline, what is happening to my physical world as is. So that's where the IoT comes in. But then the other aspect is just continuous monitoring and control.
Okay.
So it's not just simulation, but with people actually building their 3D worlds using Omniverse, they're trying to actually bring a simple single way to have a single pane of glass view. So I want to overlay the 2D data sets. The 2D could be data sets coming from an IoT sensors or IoT systems, but also I want to overlay whatever enterprise data and applications and spec sheets, data sheets, whatever that is of an equipment, and I want to interact with that. So you bring in the non 3D and the 3D all in a single pane of glass and create that context for continuous monitoring and control as well. So it's
Right.
simulation and control, monitoring and
Okay.
control.
Fantastic. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And now, if we're talking about kind of, you mentioned the metaverse and kind of the industrial metaverse, what are some of the trends that you're seeing when it comes to the industrial metaverse? Like if we're talking about, let's say, a macro level kind of thing, what are some of those trends that you're seeing as it becomes more and more of a not just a hot but also a relevant topic as it connects to IoT as well?
Yeah, so I think the term metaverse kind of became really popular with Facebook changing its name to
Right.
Meta and
Right.
a
Right.
tremendous amount of
Right.
drive that came in. But that's more focused on the consumer side of things. So what
Yep.
NVIDIA and what we are doing in Omniverse is more towards the industrial. But of course, Omniverse being a platform, it can be used for other applications as well. But I think one of the biggest trend and the drive that people are seeing is how automation efficiencies, operational efficiencies, and automations can be gained by building virtual worlds
Mhm.
of whatever processes that people are trying to imagine. So, if there's a brand new factory that someone is considering, especially with the EV phenomenon that's going around, a lot of battery companies are coming up. So, if you're building a massive, say, a battery factory, you probably want to do that first in a metaverse. Go through that whole design, iteration, testing process, and then once you have that blueprint saying that you yes, everything people, process, factory equipments, everything is as expected, then you go ahead and build it. So the room for error. Room for last minute surprises dramatically reduces. So essentially, you're gaining operational efficiencies, and then also leveraging massive amounts of automations that's going to come through AI. So Omniverse also enables all of that when you're building virtual worlds and taking into account all these latest and the greatest technology stack that we are providing. So and we are still just in the first innings of all of this, and we are already seeing a tremendous amount of interest from some of our major customers.
And what is it when you talk about interest from your customers? What is it that they're most looking to kind of have you help them do? Obviously, the efficiency side, and there's different kind of elements there. But just like from an application side, what is the big where is the big demand right now in these early innings, as you say, and where do you kind of see this kind of growing into?
So I think it's the whole notion of building like a virtual factory or a
Okay,
virtual facility. So you want to basically design all of that and bring maximum amount of efficiencies in that planning phase. And then one of the things that Omniverse does really well is allowing for collaborations between all facets of your building process. You
okay,
have people working in different tools and applications, and Omniverse actually brings all of that through USD, independent of whatever applications you're using, whatever formats you're using. It brings collaboration capabilities as well. So when you take all that into account, you know, planning phases and efficiencies plays a key role for
yeah.
customers to start adopting Omniverse.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a fantastic kind of just evolution of everything we've been talking about over the last, at least personally with me, over the last number of years. When we talked about digital twins more on kind of replicating the physical devices, but now we're talking about the actual full environment and being able to bring that to life to help with decision making, especially earlier on in the deployment process, which I know is one of the big challenges in this space, is that a lot of IoT initiatives really they fail. They don't they fail once they kind of get deployed in the pilot stage very often, and there's a lot of work that could be done earlier on or done maybe throughout, which it sounds like the Omniverse and as you know we're talking about the metaverse as well could help prevent or at least make better decisions around. From your perspective, what are the reasons that a lot of those initiatives are failing? Because obviously, I'm sure a lot of that drove Omniverse being created.
So when you're talking about failing, I think you're more talking about in general IoT deployments, or are you talking about specifically metaverse or digital twin initiatives? Which one are you referring
Yeah,
to?
it more so the IoT initiatives and
Yeah,
deployments. So edge
yeah,
initiatives, things that are being deployed physically.
correct. Yeah,
There's a reason that they are failing, and there's this virtual
yeah,
side of it, the metaverse, which, I was talking about the Omniverse,
yeah,
the, simulation, all these different things that are being created and launched now, I
yeah,
think help avoid or kind of increase likelihood of success, I guess I
yeah.
should say. So, I always wanted to get your thoughts on kind of why you think a lot of these initiatives are failing and how companies really can be approaching it to increase the likelihood that they don't fail.
Yeah, so when we talk about IoT initiatives in general failing, it's essentially the fragmented landscape that IoT is. It's basically a
Okay.
multi-vendor,
Right.
multi-protocol,
Right.
multi-system initiatives, typically that the end customers end up buying. And when we talk about any modern applications or the next generations of applications like Omniverse or anything that
Right.
the customers want to embrace, the edge device and whatever they are doing at the shop floor level or the local site level becomes very, very important and critical. And if you have a massively large global company that has multi sites that is spread across different regions and countries and has multi vendor, multi protocol,
Mhm.
you just made that problem much, much bigger. So
Sure.
how do you solve that? And that's one of the reasons why a lot of customers, when they start with an IoT initiative, they start with a very small local site, one vendor, one system, and they try to see that whether it works. And in most cases, it does. But when they try to go from there to a global scale and say that let's implement this, that's where they find a lot of challenges. And the reason why those challenges are because IoT in general is very, very high data intensive. It's like small. It's high frequency, low volume. I wouldn't say
Right.
low volume, but it's basically it's not a massively. We're not talking about streaming videos. It's a small amounts of data, but it's at a high frequency. But you're
Sure.
bringing that data from so many different systems, so you need to have a good way to aggregate, and that's why the edge devices that NVIDIA is building is trying to solve for those problems. Where You can bring data from wherever you want in whatever protocols or however you're aggregating it. But then we are essentially making sure that some of these fragmented approach that typically happens today on the edge devices can be addressed, and we are helping that by directly making those edge devices connect over USD and essentially bring that data sets from the edge into Omniverse directly natively into USD. So these are some things that we're trying to address
Okay.
as future items, which will make creation of digital twin a lot more easy for our customers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was going to ask you, kind of as it relates to a lot of these companies now have access to a lot more data than they had before. They adopt IoT in some way, or just in general, the ability to bring in new data, but they're struggling to drive intelligence from it, insights from it. There's lots of different sources. And there's that difficulty in aggregating that content. And it sounds like you all have a lot, or you're taking that as a pretty big initiative to help companies solve. When you talk with companies and work with them, what other challenges, maybe even as it relates to what we were just talking about, do you see a lot of companies have with that influx or access to new data that they maybe did not have before?
Um, the most of the data are typically siloed
Okay.
because remember we are talking to an industry that has been around for decades,
Yep.
and some of these companies have already started to embark on digital transformation maybe a decade or a decade and a half ago, and that's how they started to embrace IoT and wanted to bring all of the smartness and connected systems so that they can bridge that OT/IT. Most of the times, all of these systems were very local, very site level centric, and they were not all connected and talking at a global level. And
Right.
IoT started to change all of that, and it started to kind of break down some of those silos and the whole fragmented multi-vendor, multi-protocol. Some of that was actually breaking down. But with a goal that a company has, that everything actually will be first built in the virtual world and then will be built in the physical world. These new data sets that they are thinking about and imagining is going to just unlock tremendous amount of potentials, and ultimately drives automation and operational
Right.
efficiencies. It definitely is the whole move to an industrial metaverse is essentially helping customers tap into their existing investments that they've done for IoT initiatives as part of the digital transformation, and it
Yep.
actually tries to build that ramp from their IoT initiatives into building digital twins in Omniverse. So it's a good thing because they
Yeah,
don't
sure.
have to reinvent the wheel. They can just
Right.
leverage their existing investments in infrastructure.
One thing I wanted to ask you, just kind of came up as you were answering that question, is what has been the reception, or what has this reception been like for the companies that you talk to in more in the industrial sector? And the reason I ask is because a lot of the companies I've spoken with recently have mentioned that the industrial sector, companies that work in manufacturing and factories, has kind of been, sometimes they run into big challenges in getting them to adopt new technologies. And I'm just curious, when we're talking about Omniverse and things like, talking about the metaverse at a high level, that's a new kind of world for them to even kind of wrap their head around. So how are you kind of seeing the companies that you all work with or talk to like adopt this new technology, and kind of where do you see this going as we kind of expand out through the rest of this year into the future, because it's going to only become more and more of a widely adopted thing and something that provides more and more value to the industry.
So I think every industry, whether it's data centers, whether it is logistics and transportations, whether it is even smart city, whether it's even telecom,
Sure.
whether it's even space or deep science, and we just talked about industrial, but I'm just trying to expand that. So every vertical in industry that you can imagine is essentially going to start building things first in the virtual world.
Yeah.
And it is something that most of the industry, if not all, have been already doing that with their 3D modeling, with CAD drawings and other mechanical drawings and designs. They have been
Sure.
already doing that. That's
Sure.
the way where architects build a building and
Right.
how mechanical engineers actually build and design any kind of systems and equipments. That has been already happening. So that's not a consumer behavioral change. It's a must have. That's the only way where
Yep.
things get actually built. What metaverse in general, not industrial metaverse, metaverse in general is actually helping is bringing all of that skill sets through different ways and applications and standards that already exist into Omniverse. And they don't have to make any changes through that. We bring all of that content in whatever way they're designing today, and
Mm,
then creating it as a single platform to collaborate. And now, when you're actually designing everything off Omniverse as a baseline, you can add several different other capabilities that Omniverse brings natively. For
yeah,
example, you can add a physics engine. You can add materials. So I can actually know that this is plastic versus a metal, and of
right.
course, the physics behind a plastic and a metal different changes dramatically. So you can do a whole lot of stuff when you are bringing capabilities to build virtual worlds that are photorealistic, full fidelity visualization, an identical replica of the physical world, and then you start applying AI techniques
Yeah,
and you do simulations, which is exactly how a real world will behave. You're actually simulating it. It's not animation; it's simulation. You're simulating it in the virtual world. So you basically build a blueprint even before you actually go break ground.
yeah,
And that actually is extremely exciting for a lot of customers, and that's
yeah.
why they've tried and tested different things that Omniverse can provide, and they believe that there is a tremendous amount of potential to go that way. So that's where I think in the coming months, and I know at GTC there is a lot of different things that's going to be shared, and in the coming months and the coming years, you will see metaverse in general and how Omniverse is actually participating in that.
And one of the things you mentioned, one of the big values initially was talking about how you can kind of plug in that real world data into the Omniverse solution. Is that required, or can this? It sounds like this can all be done kind of prior to any actually physical deployment, but you kind of set up the environment to replicate the real world prior to potentially any new technology or deployments going on. Is that the case?
It could be seen both ways. So you
Okay.
could see a brown field as well as a green field.
Okay.
So when I talk about designing everything from scratch first in the virtual world, and a customer is basically thinking about building a brand new factory or a brand new warehouse or something that doesn't
Sure.
exist yet. That's your green field
Right.
side of the business. But then you can also do the same thing for your brownfield, your existing business that is running and operating today. You can bring that and build that as well into Omniverse and creating an industrial metaverse. It's
Yeah.
it's it's for both those worlds, but the key here is that you actually have a replica of whatever that world, physical world is in the
Right.
in the metaverse, and now you're using Omniverse to simulate it. That's why I said you can think about it monitor and control and simulation. And monitor and control falls into things that you have here and now. And I want to know what's happening live, and you're bringing
Yeah.
all of that data through IoT into Omniverse.
Great. Now, this is super exciting stuff to kind of learn more about. We've had a couple guests on talk about the metaverse and its applications in the IoT space, but never to this extent to
Sure,
really break down
I'm
exactly
glad.
what a product can actually do. We talk about digital twins all the time, but this is kind of taking this all to a whole new level on what you can actually create virtually prior to or throughout the deployment of any kind of new
Correct,
solution or initiative, right? And it's going to be something that I imagine saves lots of time, energy, mistakes being made, costs, things
correct,
like that, being able to handle this all through software as opposed to the
correct,
physical deployment, the hardware, which is obviously where a lot of the costs come in. And the mistakes are often amplified because of what has to go into fixing them. So,
correct.
yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of talk about
Thank
this a
you,
lot.
Ron.
This is
Yeah,
awesome. For our audience who wants to learn more about this topic, learn more about the Omniverse, learn more about what you all are doing, just maybe follow up with anything connected to this conversation, what's the best way they can
sure.
do that?
So I think you can of course go to our NVIDIA's Omniverse website, and a lot of wealth of information is already available. Tremendous amount of easy getting started applications. You can even download Omniverse to your Windows workstation and get started that way.
Okay,
And then of course I highly encourage our GTC that's coming up. This month, and you can essentially tune in. There are several different tracks, both technical and non-technical, and some major announcements are being planned, which is going to happen next week. So stay tuned for that as well.
fantastic. Well, really appreciate your time again. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to our audience about this. Very exciting stuff to kind of follow along and see how it's going to continue to impact the industry. So, thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much, Ryan.